Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Stuck Films and I have accumulated over 1,000 hours on Marvel Rivals. And with that, I've learned a ton of tips and tricks. And today I'm going to be sharing 50 of those tips and tricks to try to make yourself a better player in Marvel Rivals. Now, maybe you know some of these tips and tricks, or maybe you don't. And do me a favor, like the video if you like it, subscribe if you're new. At 20,000 subscribers, we're doing a giveaway, so make sure to check that out. But without further ado, I hope you sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. On the new map Arakko, or however you pronounce it, you can actually place a Punisher turret on top of the cart. But do keep in mind, the only times you can actually place the turret on said cart is when you actually capture the first and second point and the Groot cart is bending over a little bit, planting the trees, planting the grass, then it lets you place it. You can also place Loki clones on top of the cart as well, which a lot of people still don't know or realize. But something to keep in mind is that if you place the clones a little too far back on top of the convoy, sometimes they slide off, so it's a little hit or miss sometimes. For the next tip, if you find yourself playing against a Jeff Nado and a majority of the counters are banned like Iron Man, then you can think about picking up a character like Psylocke. By using Psylocke's ultimate on top of the Jeff Nado, you get all the isolated damage onto the Storm, so you can easily get rid of her while she's inside the ultimate. And also, Psylocke is pretty good at dealing with flyers as she is hit scan, although you do need to be a little bit closer. It is one thing to have in your back pocket. Now, hopefully by now, not necessarily everybody, but a few of you, when you spawn into the match, you throw down a rocket beacon so that everyone can get an armor pack before the round starts. This gives everybody a slight edge in the beginning of a team fight, but with the changes in Season 2.5 with Rocket and Penny, instead of picking up that armor pack from the rocket beacon, instead pick it up from the Penny beacon, because instead of 25 extra HP, you will now get 50, which is definitely a major factor. So if you're playing a 2-2-2 team composition, then I recommend both of your vanguards going the Penny and the rocket, so that everybody that's super important, your duelists and your strategists, get that armor, because tanks already have a large extra health pool, so you don't necessarily need that armor. Next up, when you're playing Cloak and Dagger and you're in Dagger's form and you want to quickly reload, instead of tapping R or your reload button, what you could do instead is quickly swapping forms to Cloak's form, then swapping back to Dagger's, and you're instantly reloaded. This saves the whole reload animation and you don't have to worry about that anymore. If you find yourself playing against shield tanks and you can't for whatever reason destroy them fast enough, more specifically a Doctor Strange, and you still want to do damage to the Doctor Strange, you could run up and melee him as the melees go through the shield, but I highly encourage you just to break the shield in general, although you can melee for some damage. When playing Rocket Raccoon, you should always be looking to move up your respawn beacon whenever you have the chance. You have to remember that it only resists teammates within 50 meters of the beacon itself, so constantly moving it around while your team is pushing up is usually the best option. Despite being called Invisible Woman, it's actually super easy to track her when she's actually invisible. All you really have to do is listen for footsteps. If she's just normally walking on the ground, it's pretty easy to tell. But it's even easier to track her when she double jumps. Usually when she double jumps, she goes invisible. But despite being invisible, you can easily track her because there's a small little orb that kind of tracks where she went. Of course, by the time she lands back on the ground after the double jump, then you can't see that orb anymore. But for a brief moment in time, you can track her. When it comes to contesting objectives, most of the time, a lot of heroes can contest objectives when they're using their ultimate abilities or any other ability. Except for when you're playing Psylocke and you're using her ultimate, you cannot contest. If you're invisible with any hero in the game, you're also not able to contest the point. Jeff Ultimate and Storm Ultimate don't count as a physical player, so you're not capping at that point. Something you always need to be careful of, especially when you're in overtime matches. A lot of people seem to forget that you can stack Psylocke's Ultimate. And what I mean by that is having all of your players sitting inside of Psylocke's Ultimate, she shouldn't be able to get any eliminations that way. Because in theory, the more people inside of that range, the less damage she's going to be doing because it hits each person one by one. That's why you hear a lot of high elo players or pro level teams, when a Psylocke ultimate is going off, they will usually use the calm stack and you all sit together. So you're not there wasting your strategist ultimate for a very simple counter. Moving on is probably one of the most asked questions in my comments, talking about how many players should be at the payload and how many should be pushing up after you win a team fight. One thing to keep in mind during this is that 3 players is the maximum speed. Now, most of the time, depending on how the fight goes, I usually either split 3-3, so 3 pushing the cart and then 3 pushed up, or you could do a 4-2 split, 4 pushed up with 2 holding. Now, another thing is you don't want to push too far ahead that if they were to portal, you can't really react. There's always some sort of sweet spot, so you really need to keep that in mind. Health packs, and even more health packs. Knowing the locations of these simple yet super effective tools is a major advantage to yourself. Most of the time, you can survive going for incredible flanks by knowing where health pack locations are, so that you're not forcing your team's strategists to overextend and potentially getting picked to heal you. Instead, do your best to know where these health pack locations are to keep yourself alive and your teammates safe. When you're playing Cloak and Dagger and you find yourself trying to use your ultimate, try to start off in Cloak's form, then proceed to use your ultimate. This allows you, right when the ultimate animation ends, you're instantly allowed to use your dark teleportation so you can instantly get to safety. This allows you so you don't have to worry about getting hit by a meteor imp when you're trying to swap between the two forms. If you're ever wondering if Wolverine has his passive or not, all you have to do is pay attention to the top of his health bar. If you see something that looks like a shield symbol with a cross, then he has his passive up and ready to use. If not, then well, there's no passive and it's free pickings. Something that a lot of people definitely notice that he has his passive and it's popped, but also don't realize that all they have to do is pay attention to the symbol as well, so you can easily track it. Now, while playing one character and being super proficient at it, essentially being a one trick can be very good for yourself individually, but if you're trying to reach higher level play in Marvel Rivals, then I highly encourage you to try to be as flexible as possible. For example, if you're a duelist player through and through, try to be very proficient at pretty much every single duelist in the game. Having that flexibility allows for easier team compositions, and you won't necessarily be at a loss if your quote-unquote one trick is banned, so you always have a backup. And of course, certain metas don't allow for certain heroes to get picked or banned, so again, it's always good to have a backup. Something that a lot of people forget is that every single hero in Marvel Rivals has some sort of hero-specific setting. Whether it's a character like Venom or Spider-Man with easy swing that you should have off, or just other heroes in general, each hero has their own unique settings, so I definitely recommend going in and tweaking them to suit your preference. When it comes to Doctor Strange and using the teleport ability, you usually teleport back to the fight after you get eliminated or wiped as a team. And etiquette is followed. Usually the first person that's picked off is the person TPing back, whether you're a strategist, a duelist, or another vanguard. That's usually what you do. Another thing to keep in mind is that the portal is on a 3-minute cooldown and it's a global cooldown. So if you just portaled and then you swapped off of Doctor Strange, one of your teammates can't swap to it and then portal right away. If that was possible, that honestly would be completely broken, let's be honest. But again, it's a 3-minute timer, so you can get off with portaling right at the very beginning of a convergence map. And then if you're able to stall long enough, you could essentially portal back. Now this next one is a common mistake that I see a lot of Loki players make, and that's when you're trying to heal or do damage to your teammates or your enemies. The issue is that you're aiming directly at the player model. Instead, be aiming at the ground that they're standing at. Because again, Loki is all about splash damage and splash healing, and chances are you're better off at connecting the ground and hitting where your teammate is standing and healing him rather than trying to hit some direct shots at him. This will drastically increase the amount of healing you're going to be able to do to your teammates. When you're playing the Human Torch and using your primary fire, in between each shot, try to do a melee. This really throws off the hitbox of your player model, so doing this is super beneficial to keep yourself alive in the air. At pretty much every rank, more specifically in the higher ranks, staggering enemies is how you're going to win most of your fights. After a team fight, if 1 or 2 enemies are alive, try to keep them alive for as long as you can, then quickly eliminate them. This makes it so that the enemy team has a longer time resetting and regrouping. Even though it seems like you're only cutting a couple seconds off the clock, it really does make a major difference. Off-angling is a crucial aspect of Marvel Rivals for a lot of the duelists in the game, and here's the best way to go about it. First, you want your team pressuring the enemy's front line. After that, that's your chance. Take your off angle. And you never want to be peeking from the same exact position multiple times. Eventually, enemies will catch on and use that against you, predicting when you're going to go for a pick and try to get the pick on you instead. So my always biggest recommendation is once you get an elimination from one particular spot, always position yourself to the next advantage point. From there, enemies will always kind of be panicking and not really understanding where you're going to be peeking next, so you can play that to your advantage. Now, a lot of people come to me with the question of crosshair placement. Where should I be aiming at in a game like Marvel Rivals because it's a third-person shooter? Now, the biggest piece of advice I can give you is always keep your crosshair at your neck or chest level. This allows you to maintain your crosshair on top of the target at all times, whereas if you were just aiming for the head, there's a lot of chances you're gonna miss because it's a smaller target and sometimes enemies move unpredictably. So having more mass at your crosshair is definitely the better option. Of course, you can do micro flicks to get to the headshot level, but for the most part, head, neck is where you're going to be aiming at. This is going to allow you to maintain more consistent shots. Another big tip is not the tunnel vision. It's super easy to hyperfocus on one target. When you're focusing on that one individual target, you're not going to be aware of flanks, enemy ults, and even your own backline. That's why I recommend shooting at one singular enemy for just a short period of time, then putting your head on a swivel. Because most often than not, when you're spending that time shooting at that one specific enemy, some ults might happen, some play might be being made. These are all things you have to consider when you're playing this game, unfortunately. Now, one super underrated mechanic in this entire game is the ping button. By default, this is on your middle mouse button. You can change it on mouse and keyboard to whatever you want. On controller, you could probably change it as well. This opens an avenue for a ton of ways to help your team out. Whether it's pinging enemy locations, health packs, or where to position yourself, pinging is always a great thing to do, because good communication isn't just about your voice. Now, I made a whole video dedicated to this, but you need to track enemy ultimates. Basically, keeping mental notes of when enemies use ultimates. One way to think of it is that most ultimates have a 90 to 120 second cycle, meaning that after they use it, it's going to be about 90 to 120 seconds, and then they'll have it again. Now, of course, those numbers can vary depending on rank, what's in your game, what you're playing against, but for the most part, you should be thinking between 90 and 120 seconds by default. Following that, we have respecting map control. You never want to overextend for eliminations. Now, yes, sometimes it might feel like going for that one elimination could win you a fight, but you have to think outside of that box. If you were to overextend, get that elimination, but you get picked off yourself, because you're overextending, it's going to take longer for you to get back to the rest of your team versus the enemy who just got eliminated closer to their spawn. And because you're down that one player and they have the closer spawn, they can use that elimination as momentum or a snowball. That's why winning space and forcing rotations often wins more games than overextending for eliminations. Now, something I've been preaching from the dawn of this game's existence is the high ground. You always want to rotate to the high ground when possible. And you might be wondering why. Well, you get better angles. In theory, you have better safety with more vantage points, more cover, more ways to fall back if you're getting pressured. And of course, because you're on high ground, you have a ton of pressure on the enemies that are just below you. You can see this from high level play and even pro play, how fast that teams react at getting the high ground. Usually once the high ground is taken, the other team will force a fight on that high ground to reclaim it, or simply they give the high ground and step back and lose space. That's why maintaining and controlling high ground is a major factor. Now, another tip that a lot of people don't understand until the middle or higher ranks is that flanking isn't necessarily trolling in this game. If you're pulling attention, you're making space. That is a great thing in a game like Marvel Rivals. But of course, there's always going to be a cost. You do not want to overstay. The second you're pulling off a flank and you're lurking in the back, trying to pull the enemies towards you, the second they start to understand that there's someone in their backline that's not supposed to be there, you have to get out instantly. No hesitation. In a flash of a second, you gotta be out of that fight. You have to understand that flanking isn't just about getting an elimination, it's about also pulling attention, like I previously mentioned. If you pulled the attention and the enemies start walking towards you, they're losing space, and your team should in theory be walking up and taking that space back. So it isn't all about getting eliminations or picks. Even though you probably want to, you don't necessarily need to. Now, this next step is something that even I sometimes forget, and that's reload management is underrated. Pre-reload in the downtime. You don't want to run dry mid-fight, especially if you're playing a character like Hela, Punisher, Winter Soldier. Even though Winter Soldier does get, ammo back after he uses abilities, it's just, something also to take account for. You could be in the middle of a fight as a Hela, shooting all of your shots, or shooting 3 shots, and then, wide swinging to take an angle. When you're wide swinging, all of a sudden, you shoot 3 shots, and you're in the middle of reloading in the middle of the open. So before you go for that open peek, or that wide swing, always make sure at least tap your reload button so that you have all shots ready to go. Again, I still make this mistake sometimes, Nobody's perfect. It is something that eventually you will have to get used to. Now, something that a lot of people forget about is that if you die on Loki quickly in a fight and you respawn and you have your, regeneration domain ability ready to go, you can press that ability from spawn or even shoot at the ground. All you have to do is communicate to your team that those runes are on the ground and they run to your clones and they're getting healed up by the runes. It's actually something that's incredibly useful that still to this day, not a lot of people know about. It could quite literally save your team even though you're not there. That's why Loki is probably one of the best healers in the entire game. Now, I think this next tip is pretty much a summary of how a lot of the ranked matches go. And that's when knowing to switch off. If you're 0-6, an 0-6 Spider-Man, for example, your comp is crumbling, or you're being hard countered, you need to change heroes. It doesn't matter if you have some sort of ego and you know that you can do better, or it's that your team's fault that you're doing so bad. At the end of the day, the only constant you can change is yourself. If you yourself are 0-6 and your teammates are also 0-6, you should be the first person to swap. This opens up the avenue that people are like, oh, okay, this guy is swapping, so we should probably swap as well. It's something that you just eventually have to understand. Now, I think this next tip is a major factor, and that's baiting ultimates with low commitment pushes. Most of the time, if you start playing super aggressively as a team, the enemy team is more than likely to use some type of ultimate to counteract that. But here's the catch, that was exactly what you were looking for. Make them use an ultimate even though you didn't use any yourself and just applied pressure. The more you do that and the more you force enemies to use ultimates when they don't need it is a super big advantage for you and your team. From there, you just win the battle because you have the ultimates when they don't. Something that's super underrated and a lot of players still don't do, even in pro level play. The amount of value you can get from super aggressive postures is actually insane in this game, and it's really easy to do it. Now, some of these next tips you probably already know, or maybe you forgot about, so a little bit of a refresher. And I really encourage you, if you're really trying to climb the ladder and get a whole lot better at Marvel Rivals, then you really need to learn every hero's cooldowns. Knowing when they're vulnerable is how you win in duels. Take, for example, Emma. If Emma Frost used her diamond form, it's on a relatively long cooldown, give or take about 13 seconds. That's your chance to do a ton of damage to Emma Frost, or a Winter Soldier looking for a hook. She won't have the diamond form to really protect herself. Also, if you break her shield, that's another guaranteed pick. I think a big thing that people forget about is audio cues. Footsteps, ability windups, and ults all have unique sounds, and you can easily use that to your advantage, especially characters that are invisible, like Invisible Woman. If she's invisible, you can hear her, walking around. This is known. These are things you should be remembering and keeping in mind when you play against said characters. Like I was mentioning a little bit earlier with the off angles and not trying to pick the same spot to peek from, this can also be said when you're trying to flank. That's why learning popular flank routes allows you to predict and punish enemy flankers. Take, for example, the Loki convoy map, and you're on the defending side. A majority of the time, flankers are going to be looking at that right side, going through that little, garden area where the water fountain is. That's a really big flank route, or just a route that a lot of enemy duelists like to go through. So knowing that people are probably going to be coming from there and, setting your sights on that before, the enemy pushes the cart is probably a good idea. You should always be looking to rotate early. You don't want to wait until the fight's lost to rotate. It's essentially resetting. You're always going to be wanting to use the space you gain. After pushing enemies back, you don't want to just stand there just looking at it. If you force them back or their attention is somehow diverted and they step back a couple feet, this is your chance to take that space. The more space you have, the easier it is for the rest of your team to do everything that is necessary. When playing the game, you always want to be looking to coordinate focus fire. And what that means is burst heroes one at a time for faster wipes. Even if they're in a strategist ultimate, if you have your entire team shooting at them, then it's probably going to be an elimination. You should be checking the kill feed constantly. Info is power. Know if it's a 6v4 or a 4v6 before engaging. This is pretty self-explanatory, and it's probably something you should be doing, or if not already. Now, this is relatively a big one, is that if you lose the first fight, you want to set up for your second. Don't just trickle and reset and hold corners, wait for your team to regroup. you never want to go back into the fight one by one. Something you have to remember is that ulting or using any sort of ultimate ability, whether it's a vanguard, duelist, or even a strategist, you don't necessarily need an elimination. You can also use it as a zoning tool. By forcing enemies off the point, this is also a very good way to use ultimate abilities. Although it doesn't feel like you're getting value because you're not getting picks or eliminations, it is in theory still getting some sort of value by zoning. Another thing to think about is the soft hold chokes and not the point. You always want to fight before they reach the objective space, because you can always fall back to the objective and stall on point. These are all things you can keep in mind. Now, something you need to break the habit of is stop peeking when you're being held. When you're being held at spawn or they're holding a very aggressive position, you don't want to just keep peeking and feeding them ult charge. Wait until all of your team is together, then peek as one. You don't want to be feeding ult charge in a neutral when you don't need to. This will just lead to you staying at your spawn door longer and longer. A lot of players have a lot of tells when they want to use their ultimate abilities. Take for example a Groot. A Groot all of a sudden decides to start walking in front of his team pretty aggressively. Well, he probably has some sort of ult, or their team has an ult strategy. Recognizing these weaknesses allows your team to set up properly to receive said ults. Is all of a sudden the enemy team walking up super aggressively? Well, they're probably going to use some type of ult. Is it Emma Frost all of a sudden running at you super aggressively? Then, well, your strategist should probably play in some type of line of sight place so that, you're protected from that silencing ability. When drafting or picking the hero that you want to play, you always want to keep in your mind what map you're playing on. Are you playing on a map with big lines of sight? Would a Hela or a Black Widow or even a Hawkeye fit those lines of sight a lot better than in comparison to a character maybe like Psylocke or Black Panther who excel in diving in close range versus open line of sight places? Also, you kind of need to think about peel versus pressure. If your team has no peel, then you should probably not pick a glass cannon type of damaging hero because they won't really be able to peel for your team. If you pick a double dive, you need to communicate it. Let the tank know to go in with you if you're playing Captain America Psylocke, Captain America Black Panther, Hulk, whatever your dive team setup is. Even if it's just normal ranked solo queue, definitely calm to your team that you want to go in with your tank. This is just a lot easier. I think another big factor is that a lot of people, follow comps blindly. Take for example res comp or any other sort of pro team composition. These pro team compositions are built in mind of the pros, so they are working with perfect execution. Whereas your solo queue matches, you're definitely not going to have that perfect coordination and execution. So you always want to be building for your own team synergy rather than forcing stuff onto people that have no idea what's going on. I think it goes without saying, or hopefully you know by now, that every time you lose or win, you should go back and watch your recent match, see why you won, see why you lose. Again, the only person you should be looking at in these reviews is yourself, especially if you're solo queuing, because you are the constant. You're the only thing that can change. You can't change how your teams are going to play, what they're going to pick, or how they interact with one another. You can only focus on yourself, and that's the only way you can really improve. And if you're looking to improve yourself, send me a message to my email, duckfilmsttv@gmail.com, and I'll definitely gladly do a coaching session for you. Now, I've mentioned this time and time again, but you want to avoid queuing on tilt. One bad game, take a 10-minute break. If you're constantly thinking about that match, you need a break. Don't discontinuously keep playing. It's just going to get worse and worse. We've all been there. Nobody's perfect. You'll get angry. You'll get upset at the match you just played. And if you go right into the next match, you'll probably carry whatever thoughts you were thinking about into the next match. So if you take that break, forget about what happened, move on to the next one. Now, I think this is a big step up, is that be the IGL if no one else is. Shot calling, whether it's good or bad, often wins even when skill is even. If you can do the right comms, even if the game is going poorly, and communicate, maybe the outcome will change. One voice is better than none. It's something you kind of have to grow out of, and it took me quite a while to grow out of that as well. Even if the voice isn't 100% perfect, maybe again it can change the outcome. But anyways, those were 50 tips for Marvel Rivals Season 2.5, and hopefully these help you in any way, shape, or form. And if they did, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button. Greatly helps out the channel. And again, we're doing a giveaway at 20,000 subscribers, so well, make sure to subscribe. It's been Duck Films. I hope you have a great and safe day.